Welcome back, everyone, to the Risk Intel podcast, powered by SRA Watchtower, where we share risk intelligence with experts from across the banking industry. I'm your host, Ed Vincent, CEO at SRA Watchtower. Hello, welcome back to the Risk Intel podcast. I'm excited to have Jeff Fink return to the program with us here today. Jeff, thanks for joining us again today.
Thank you. Great to be back again. Appreciate it.
Jeff, we've covered quite a bit in the last few episodes where we've been talking about really execution of a data strategy. And we started by talking about how to get unstuck, if you will. We also talked about what a data strategy really is and why reporting alone isn't enough. Today, we're going to build upon that and talk about really making it real. So how do you take this strategy off the whiteboard, right, out of your heads, take something that maybe is academic and actually put it into action, put it into practice. So we talked about a few different things in our last couple of episodes. We talked about this mindset shift from reporting to building a strategy itself. We also talked about the pillars of data strategy, governance and architecture, right? The technical aspect and the people and the processes. And most recently, we talked about why reporting itself is not sufficient, right? That doesn't equate just to strategy. It's got to be more than that that goes into your data strategy, and the importance of culture and the role that plays in executing a data strategy. So today, let's take kind of those foundational elements and let's put this into practice, as I said. So what's the first real step, right? Now that you've defined your data strategy on paper, what's the first real step to putting that into action itself?
Yeah, no, and I'll maybe break it into a few more steps than just one, but that first part or that first step is making sure you've defined some business goals or that your goals align to the business strategy and the business priorities. So not just thinking about it as yes, I built a data strategy and I'm going to have some goals for that data. Don't have it in a vacuum of just thinking about it as data and what can I do with it, but that you're actually aligning it with the business priorities. I think is a very good place to start. So that what does that look like? Some examples there. I want to focus my subject area on how do I improve customer retention, or or things like, how do I increase operational efficiency, or something around, meeting regulatory compliance. Like those are actual business goals. And yes, there's data of course that will be needed to help satisfy those goals or help achieve those goals. So, the next piece of that is, where is that data? Is it existing data we already have and already have warehoused, already have in our core system, for example, or in a CRM? Maybe it just exists in spreadsheets, within the organization. Definitely want to pick something that where data already exists and I know how to get it, and it's readily available here. So making sure that we have those business goals defined, or that we're aligning to those business goals or a business goal, and that the data is accessible and is an existing data asset that we already have access to. And then I think it's thinking about this small incremental. I think we talked about that last time. But it's
Right.
a high value use case. And so what's a minimum viable product, MVP? What's a first step? It might just be a dashboard, a simple dashboard or a simple report, visualizing our loan pipeline, so a trend of the pipeline over time, or are just looking at our customer churn as a trend or on a dashboard as a metric. To me, those are, it's a very tangible output, but it's small, and hopefully it has some high value. So those are, just some first steps, like how to actually get started and get something off the ground, once you've defined that data strategy.
If we had lunch with a chief data officer at a multi-billion-dollar financial institution today, and in that conversation, one of the things we talked about was just as you laid out here, right? Starting with business problem or business goal. And rather than beginning with a data goal per se, right? And saying, right, what is the business trying to achieve? And let's make sure that drives the bus rather than what we might find interesting from the category, the inventory, the architecture that we have around our data project. And so I like that concept of starting with, I'll say, the business first, if you will.
Yeah.
And then from there, kind of walking back and saying, okay, well, that's the business priority, right? Do we have the data that's accessible, and it's existing and it's accessible that we can then attack, and then really honing in on a high value use case. So I think that really takes it to put you in a position so that when you do deliver, there is truly business value, which I think maybe gets into the next step of, all right, we've now got a higher likelihood of delivering value when this is achieved, but how do we get there? Maybe going kind of one step back, before you get to that end outcome is, well,
Yeah.
you still need a team in order to execute on this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, again, thinking about this as this is a first step. This is essentially like a pilot project. So you definitely want a lightweight team, not overstaffing this. You want to get the right people involved. So I believe, I guess what I would call a data champion. So, this is someone internal to the institution. Maybe it's a business analyst or even an operations manager that understands the technology involved here, the data involved. So you want that internal data champion, and then maybe it's a combination. So it's a mix of someone internal that understands the data, understands this technology, and can actually do some of this, do this work. And then maybe that also requires, in an ideal mix here would be, maybe some external support, consultant, partner, vendor, that can kind of help bring this together, already has a template, for how to bring these things together and take these actions. So I think, to me, that's a keeping it small and light. You've got ownership there, and you've defined, the project, and viewing it as a pilot, and getting that team, hitting the ground running, I think is kind of that next step of, how do I get started? Yeah.
All right, you've identified your champion. You've got your lightweight team, right? They're nimble, they're agile, they're able to move quickly here. You've got clear accountability and ownership. What comes next? What's the next stage gate, if you will?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's get it done, so actually build something and deliver, that first insight of, let's show tangible business value. And a key piece here is, make sure it's with real data. So, showing demonstrations of, saying this is business value, but it's demonstration data or fake data, isn't going to cut it here. It has to be real data, and showing that tangible business value. And I think not getting overly complicated on the tools. And that doesn't mean going out making purchases and making some long-term commitments to technologies or tools. I think it's start with simple tools first. Excel is a great tool for pilots. Power BI, for visualizations and reports. Other reporting tools as well. And then just doing some minimal transformation to the data when it's needed. And that's okay. That's done in a manual way. Again, this is a pilot, so I've defined the business rules of how these base data elements coming out of whether it's our core system or out of Excel spreadsheets. I might need to do some transformation of that data, so the presentation of that data is going to show that value. I want to be able to do that minimal transformation so that, again, whoever I'm showing it to and is evaluating, they're evaluating business value. You want them to be able to see what that end product could look like or will look like. Even if that's manually, transformed to start with. So you're running this pilot. definitely want to, document, the impact it has, have some follow-ups to, gather that feedback, from the stakeholders that you show the pilot to, and take that feedback and get that documented. Yeah.
All right, you're now out of the starting gate, as you said, right? You've delivered that first set of value. How do you operationalize, right? Where do you go from here, right? You've gotten something into the hands
Yeah.
of the business, and they say, all right, great, you've delivered value. Now what?
Yeah. Yeah, now we need a scalable plan. Let's sketch out a roadmap, making sure that we're answering some questions that came up, some of the feedback we got in that pilot program. Um, you know, Probably you're going to find, oh yeah, actual, additional data elements are needed. So, what are those additional data elements? Where do they come from? Um, are the mappings correct? Let's do some validation and make sure, what we've got, actually makes sense. Um, and then thinking about, the infrastructure, the actual architecture of, that plan, we're going to put this into production. So this can't be, just manually, creating this on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, using Excel. Now we've got to go to that next step. How do we define some resources, for cloud data storage? Is this gonna be a first phase of a data warehouse? What is that infrastructure? Partnering with IT to make sure that, this is a plan that works for the organization, not done in a vacuum. So business, making sure that the business is aligning, and involving IT, setting up those roles. Do we need a data analyst? Do we need a data engineer? Or sorry, we do need those roles, and making sure that we have people that can, fulfill those roles and actually build this and make this scalable and put it into production. And then also thinking about, data governance and security, not thinking about that after the fact, but building that into our plan. To put this into production, those things have to be there from day one.
Yes, I think that, right, a number of these things, right, you just ran through there. We're going to use a technique tomorrow in one of our meetings
Yeah.
called this pre-mortem technique, right, of talking through the impediments, the challenges, right, the potential obstacles before you go down this path, which will then increase the
Yeah.
likelihood of success, if you will, of achieving a successful outcome. So, right, thinking through those items there. Ahead of enacting that scalable plan, but creating the scalable plan and then enacting it. So, you ran through, what I jotted down here is about 6 steps along the way there, Jeff, right? To take the data strategy that you've got on paper and put it into practice. I'm going to ask you for a closing thought here in a second,
Sure.
but let me just try and recap these back to you. Number one, aligning to a business goal, making sure that right there that your data activity is not an academic exercise. It's gonna be aligned to drive business value. Number two, you're working with data assets that you can get your hands on, that existing assets that are accessible. Number three, you pick a small, high value use case, something that is going to move the needle. It's going to deliver value. Number four, you get a lightweight team in place, right? You use the words there, right? Of a small team, a nimble one, an agile one. Maybe it's with an internal data champion plus an external advisor or support colleague. And that small team, that lightweight team, is going to have ownership and accountability for the pilot program. And then you kind of round it out by saying, well, now you've got to deliver. You've got to build and deliver that first insight, deliver something of value.
Yeah.
And once you've delivered value, then you get into that final step of scaling from there. But at that point in time, right, you've probably got a bit of organizational support. Maybe you have a business champion that's going to go to bat for you, right, when you put that scalable plan in front of someone for funding or for further resourcing. So with that as the framework, that's tangible, that's very clear. If someone is still stuck at this point in time, and right, they've created this plan and they can't get out of that starting gate, right? What's the one piece of advice you would give them here to, or the one action they can take, I'll say this week, right now, to get out of the starting gate and start executing against their data strategy.
Yeah, I always go back to, just starting small and iterating from there. So, as you said, what's up front, is thinking about where is the tangible value, or how can we show tangible value, making sure that it aligns to our business goals, our business priorities. But a lot of those get into, pretty big meaty topics, very quickly. But being able to, yes, think about it, from a, holistic or global perspective, but then paring that back to how do I start small? And then I'm knowing that I'm going to iterate from there, and it's not a big bang approach. I've got to do everything up front. So avoiding any large, upfront investments, thinking about, what is the final state of this? What are the tools and technologies? Let's just get to value quickly and show it, get some feedback, and make it collaborative. As I mentioned, IT and business, must work together, to make this successful. So doing that up front, explaining, what the goals are of the project, that it's a pilot, and we want to get some feedback. And then I think, Ed, the last thing I'd say is just make sure that you're measuring, when you do, you have you've built something tangible, you've built that roadmap, and you put those first steps into production, and people are using it, that you're actually measuring that usage and understanding, who's using it, and maybe even, and more importantly, like who's not using it, and finding out why. Maybe there's some
Right.
training needed, maybe they don't have the proper access, just making sure that, you've built something of value. Let's make sure we're going to get the return on that, because we're measuring, like, who's using it and the value that they're getting out of it as well.
I think that's fantastic, Jeff. That is manageable, right?
Yeah.
If you will, there of saying, start small and iterate, collaborate, in particular, across, business and technology, um, and then measure that value. And right, if you go back to that iterate concept, right, you'll learn as much from a success as you will from a shortcoming there, right? If you're going to iterate, right, you want that feedback, and then you want to continue to
Right.
cycle through. So I think
That's right. Don't be afraid to fail. Just get started and iterate from there. Yeah. Love it.
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate this. Hopefully, this really crystallizes some of the theory that we've talked about, putting it into practice here. I'm sure you'd be willing to take calls from anyone that wanted to dig into this and hear from any of your firsthand experience, or having you be a sounding board. So I appreciate you being here, sharing your
Love it.
perspective, and hopefully this leads to some conversations for you with folks that are ready to put this into practice, right? To take this data strategy and get out of the starting gate and get rolling.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah.